Hello, how's everybody doing? I hope everybody's doing good. Um, I just saw a video on Jonathan Bernis, Jewish Voice. The link is in this description. And he just did a video on the lost tribes of Israel. He just opened up a ministry or a section of his ministry dedicated to the lost tribes of Israel. And I got psyched because he's he talks about the Silk Road. I don't know if anybody remembers me talking about the Silk Road. That there's more Judaic descendants along the Silk Road than there are going up the Rhine River in Germany. But and of course that includes Iran, Persia, Turkey. You know, all the way to China. The Uyghurs are Judaic. The Uyghurs. They have the J2Y chromosome in China. The Uyghurs, those Uyghurs, they're Judaic, descendants of Judah. It's amazing. But then he's got you know people all over the world, just groups all over the world that are you know basically descendants of Judah plus you know the people that have a heritage of being descendant of Israel. But anyways, and you can of course verify it with the Y chromosome. But most of my previous obs- observations are remain the same as far as the Y chromosome, with the exception of the Arameans. The Arameans, if you remember, if I remember, the Arameans are like basically almost inside of Israel. At times, the Arameans were on the side of Judah, fighting against Israel, or at times they're on the side of Israel fighting against Judah whenever they were fighting against each other. So it's that G Y chromosome within the Jewish populations is a G2. It's a G2 Y chromosome. So I'm probably going to have to distinguish between G2 and G1. G2 being Arameans, and G1 being the Assyrians. The Assyrians that from Assyria that went into Europe as well. So, and then the F, the various Y chromosomes of F are probably Lud, the Lydians. So that's where it stands now with the rest of the observations that I have. With the I2 is probably Dan. I mean, the I2 is Dan. The I1 is probably Dan too, because you know goes the I1 goes is like the first excursion all the way up into Denmark and places where they call Dan. I2, of course, is in Sardinia and the Danube. Danube named after Dan. They named everything after Dan. Even Sardinia probably was Sardinia, which the foreigners, when they're not familiar with a word, or they hear a word, they'll adapt it to their own um, pronunciation or understanding. Sardinia changed several times, and but it came to mean different things like sandal. Sardinia is like a sandal, or even to this day in Portuguese, sandalia is a sandal, which is what the island of Sardinia looked like. So they called it the Sandal Island because it's something they could relate to. But it was probably originally Sar Dan, which is the Prince Dan. But anyways, that's just an idea that I had because whenever foreigners, hear something, they'll relate it to what they're familiar with in talking. But that's just an idea. But anyways, it's known to have been, of course, the the ancient descendants of Dan. Of course, the same I-2 that's in Sardinia is in the Danube as well, and the Baltics and places like that. But the I-1 is probably the first or the original oldest excursion of Dan into Europe, and I-2 is just another lineage of Dan. Probably that's what it is. But and of course, I is connected to J, which is the descendants of Arpachshad, Arphaxad, who is one of the sons of Shem, who is also the father of the Eberus and Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. So that's why they're all the same Y chromosome. I mean Y lineage tree from Arpachshad, which includes the Arabic people as well, all over Arabia and you know even North Africa, in Europe, Greece, Turkey, Iran, and all the way into Europe and all the way to China, of course. And there's other known um, Judaics as well, called Jews that went, they were dispersed as well over the world to Iberia. From Iberia, they went to South America. They went to Brazil. They went to Argentina. All over. They are basically the people that helped develop those countries, and as far as trade and commerce and things like that, and music and politics, all that stuff. But anyways, because even in the Amazon jungle, there's Judaic people that went there from Portugal, and that people that we knew, that I knew when I was a kid in the Amazon jungle. So that was just about it. I was pretty excited. I also got positive feedback on my starlight problem, and there was something else that I was thinking of, is that um, with the as far as the light is concerned, the light, the photons, they you know have their own rate of time, And with it doesn't matter when in the light experiment, it doesn't matter when is not a thing with photons because they don't exist in time. They're like there is no time with photons. So when you fire photons through a double slit experiment, that's why they interact with each other is because they're not affected by time. They have no sense of time except or unless they are observed or detected or by us or observed by us. When they're observed by us, then they they are seen by way of our observation as passing through time because we are the ones passing through time. So when you observe the photon going through the double slit, then it doesn't react with other photons. So it's our observation that causes the photon to not react with other photons because it's being observed as passing through time, but that's from our perspective, from our observation when we observe it, which I thought was an interesting thing too as well, which could have something to do with the reason why we can see distant starlight, even though with our observation light takes time. But as far as the photon is concerned, the photon is not in time or affected by time itself. And it actually reaches our eyes instantaneously in reality. But then when you go to observe it or measure it, when you go to measure light or observe light, then that's when light has the speed of light. So that is a mind blowing reality. Is that when you go to measure it or observe it, then it has a speed of light. But if you're not measuring or observing it, it's instantaneous. Even even though from our observation, light, the same light from the same event is seen by us by our observation in different places in the sky at different times. When I say at different times, the same we see the same event at different times, but the different time is years apart from each other. So the the speed, I mean the amount of matter affects the speed um, a a lot more than what I think people are understanding. So that because if this we're seeing the same event in different places, that's fine, but we're seeing the same event years apart from each other because of the amount of matter in the vicinity. So that has a huge effect on the distant starlight reaching us. But I thought it was interesting too that photons with the according to the double slit experiment, they don't actually they're not affected by time. They don't they don't exist in time. They're only it's only when we go to observe it and measure it that the photon is going through time. So I thought that was very interesting with a double slit experiment, because the photons will react with other photons even though they're being shot at different times. According to them, they're not in time, so they're reacting with other photons um, at different times. Unless we go to observe it, unless we go to measure it, then there's they're not affected by each other when we go to observe it. I thought that was very interesting. But anyways, that was it. I was just a little bit psyched with Jonathan Bernis talking about the lost tribes of Israel, and he mentioned specifically the Silk Road, which I haven't seen a lot of people talk about. But he had a hope of, a number of other people, Paul Wilbur and some other people, went and traveled to some of these places all the way to China to find these lost tribes of Israel. And turns out that the Uyghurs, they're Judaic as well in China because of the Silk Road history. So it's basically confirming the observations of, the Y chromosome people, the Judaic people with a Y chromosome traveling all the way to China. So everything remains the same, except for, as I mentioned, the G2 Y chromosome would be Aram. The G1 is probably Assyria, because the G1 goes into Europe, and the G2 is associated with the Jewish people. So it's probably Aram and Asher, the two brothers, um, descendants of Shem. And then, of course, there's the H, there's the I and J, and there's the F, which is probably Lud or Lydia, Lydians. These are the Semitic populations descended from Shem. But that was pretty interesting, anyways. Plus, the other thing was about the light, the fact that light doesn't exist, is not affected by time, until and unless we observe it or measure it, then it's going through time. I just thought that was very interesting. It's our observation that changes the how how it acts, how it reacts, because of our observation affects the way, the scatter pattern, or the interference pattern. But in reality, the light arrives instantly. You know, that's why we can see distant starlight. But then it's when we go to measure it or observe it that light has a speed, which of course is never the same speed, because the rate of time is never the same, and the measure of distance is never the same throughout its travel in space from distant stars, because for most of the distance or travel of the photon, it's traveling where there's no matter, so it's not slowed down, not affected by the rate of time for most of the distance between the star and our eyes. So for most of the distance, it's traveling near almost instantaneously anyway. So that's why we can see this distant starlight, because it arrives instantly unless we go to observe it or measure it. Then it's going through time at a certain speed depending on the amount of gravity. And of course, where there's no gravity, it's not affected by gravity, and the rate of time is going by real fast. Anyway, that's about it for my latest observations. Plus, I had one positive response about the time light problem. So I thought that was pretty good. So God bless everybody. Take care. Stay close to the truth, because the truth will set us free.